held with NASA astronaut Christina Hammock Koch, entitled The Wonder of Space. In this plenary, Astronaut Koch will discuss her journey to NASA and her experiences living in space for almost a year aboard the International Space Station. As an introduction, we will watch a brief autobiographical summary of Astronaut Koch in her own words. Hi. As a reminder, please be sure to remain on mute throughout this plenary. Most recently, Astronaut Koch is recognized for her service as flight engineer on the International Space Station for Expedition 59, 60, and 61. Koch set a record for the longest single space flight by a woman with a total of 328 days in space. Astronaut Koch, we virtually welcome you back home to North Carolina and thank you for your willingness to serve as our keynote speaker this morning. Without further ado, take it away, Astronaut Koch, and of course, as a fellow alumna of NC State, go Pack!
Thank you so much, Dr. Fleming, and yes, go Pack. It is absolutely my honor and privilege to be with you all today. I think the work that you all do is absolutely instrumental in solving one of the biggest things that our nation faces, which is, students achieving their potential, and especially in my case, I'm thinking about them going into STEM fields. So thank you for the work that you do. It is just, like I said, an honor to be with you, and congratulations so far on a successful conference. So today, I hope that my presentation is a little bit of an inspirational journey with you all, something to show you the exciting things that you can do with STEM careers, my path from being a North Carolina person and student who did after-school programs to eventually flying an 11-month mission on board the space station. And for me, that also meant achieving my dreams, which is, I think, the most important thing that we're all excited about inspiring people to do. So without further ado, I will start sharing some pictures with you all to tell that story. So here we have just a couple little visions of myself in sort of formulating the dream that I had to become an astronaut, from working in the Antarctic to learning to fly jets during training to actually being on a spacewalk. And of course, my dream started in Jacksonville, North Carolina, where I grew up for the most part. And one of the things that inspired me was anything that made me feel small. And in my case, I used to love looking up at the night sky from my backyard. I used to love going to the ocean, and just anything that made me ponder the size and breadth of the universe and how much there was to explore was kind of where that spark started for me. And I remember when I was little, I had posters up in my room. This is actually my dorm room at the North Carolina School of Science and Math in Durham. And you can see I had pictures of space up on my walls. And so those things that I loved as a student and a little girl were the things that actually guided my path. I did have the honor of doing space camp actually when I was in middle school and high school. And this was just another great way for me to learn more about this field that I love so much. But an interesting thing happened to me at space camp. I was there, and there was actually a class that was held on how to become an astronaut. And of course, everyone there is just like me, space geeks at heart. We're writing down notes and filling out everything that the instructors are writing on the whiteboard of how to become an astronaut. And I looked around at the people, and we all had the same dream. It was a highly, unlikely thing to happen. And I thought to myself that if I were ever worthy of contributing to human spaceflight as an astronaut, I wanted it to be because I became a person that could be a great astronaut by achieving my own passions and not necessarily by living life according to a checkbox of what you should do in that case. So I decided that I was going to sort of strike out on my own path and, allow my dreams to guide me in that path. And that's exactly what I did. Along the way, there were times when some of my choices were questioned, but it turned out to be the right path for me for a number of reasons. So as Dr. Fleming said, after high school in North Carolina, I went on to North Carolina State University majoring in physics and electrical engineering. And I got an internship at NASA, which turned out to be completely instrumental in actually getting a full-time job with NASA after graduation. So I worked in that field for a while, but just as importantly, I also try to develop other hobbies outside of work, just like your students are doing outside of the classroom in school. And one of my favorite hobbies was rock climbing. Rock climbing taught me teamwork. It taught me to do things that scared me, to work through my fears, and to turn fear into focus, and to set goals and to achieve those goals. I set the goal to do a type of rock climbing that is kind of sort of an advanced type of rock climbing where you climb safely and in a protected way, but without a rope necessarily above your head. So you have to work through a lot of technical things in achieving that. And setting that goal really helped me to achieve a level of confidence that I relied on a lot throughout my career. Now, as I mentioned, I was working as a NASA engineer, but I had also had this love of exploring anything, around the world, and that included Antarctica. I had posters up of Antarctica in my room just next to those space posters. And so I actually left a perfectly good engineering job at NASA to go work at the South Pole for a year and then to do other work in the Antarctic. And it was actually when I was working in the high Arctic that I applied to become an astronaut in 2012. And before you knew it, I found myself in this group of people selected in the astronaut class of 2013. Now, this is when my life changed dramatically, and I called it Learn 5 New Careers in 2 Years period of astronaut candidate training. We had to learn how to fly high-performance jets. This is something we do for our training. How to do spacewalking in our giant facility, which you saw videos of earlier, and also to learn all about the International Space Station, how to operate the robotic arm on it. This is a photo of the International Space Station, and to give you a feel for it, it's about the size of a football field when you take into account the solar arrays. And these things that look kind of like beverage cans are actually the habitable modules that we live in. And when you take them all together, it's about the size, they say, of a 5-bedroom home. Astronauts get to and from the space station ever since 2011 after the shuttle was retired by NASA using a Russian spacecraft called the Soyuz, and that's actually how I got to the space station. However, as of this year, we're also transporting astronauts from the U.S. again in a commercial vehicle made by SpaceX that's called the SpaceX Dragon. And actually, while we're on the subject, you guys have to stay tuned because this mission with astronauts Bob and Doug here is actually going to be returning to Earth and splashing down in just a couple days. So stay tuned for exciting stuff for that. Maybe something to tune your kids into in those after-school programs or those summer programs. So after these 2 years of candidate training, I was fortunate and a few years later got a flight assignment. And that meant I started a new phase of training, and that involved learning about all the science that I would actually be doing on my mission and learning how to fly that Soyuz spacecraft. I spent the better part of 2018 living in Russia, training on the spacecraft and all the Russian systems. Before you know it, it was time to blast off. And the capsule that we were in is right up here at the top of the rocket. And after liftoff, about 8 minutes later, the spacecraft that we are inside separates from the top of the rocket, and it's just flying in free space like this. And a few hours later, we actually rendezvous with the International Space Station. This hatch right here, or this docking mechanism, actually docks to the space station automatically, and that same hatch that you see there is the one that we open up and crawl through to enter into the International Space Station and get to work. Now, why do we have the space station? The space station is actually a national laboratory that specializes in science that we cannot do on the Earth, oftentimes and usually because of the microgravity environment in space. One of the scientific things that we do is to grow plants, and this is part of what we do to learn how we can explore deeper into space. We also do a lot of science that actually brings benefits back to Earth, things like pharmaceuticals, things like learning the physical, like fundamentals of physical science to hone in on industrial processes on Earth. And it's really an amazing thing to see the creativity of not only scientists from all over research institutions, but companies too, bringing their science up to the International Space Station and watching those benefits come back to Earth from what we're able to do. Now, of course, in addition to science, we have to keep the station running at peak performance. So we do a lot of maintenance, upgrades, and things like that. So we kind of have to be the fix-it people of the space station, maybe doing science experiments in the morning and fixing the space toilet in the afternoon. Another part of what we do is spacewalks. And this is Jessica Neer and I preparing our spacesuits prior to one of our spacewalks. Now, when you're normally when we're working, as you can see, we're just wearing normal clothes. We're working inside the space station. But every once in a while, we have to upgrade the outside of the space station. And in order to do that, we have to put on these spacesuits, of course. And then we get to head out the airlock, and this is our view of our typical workday here. That is me in the suit right there. And we are actually accompanied by people in mission control on the ground, leading us every step of the way through the spacewalk. This is astronaut Stephanie Wilson and Mark Vandehei on the ground doing just that for our spacewalk. Another awesome aspect of the International Space Station is just that, the international cooperation that we get to do. There are astronauts from all over the world, different space agencies on board, and many, many countries have also contributed hardware to the International Space Station. So it's truly a global effort that sort of answers, in my opinion, humanity's call to explore that we all share. This is me working with cosmonaut Alexei Ovchinin prior to one of the Russian spacewalks and some of their equipment. I was also very lucky that I got to be on board for the first ever United Arab Emirates astronaut to be a part of the space program and flying safe, and that is in their Fazza al-Mansouri. So that was a great honor for me. But of course, you know, it's not all work on board the space station. We actually do have weekends in space, and one of my favorite things to do on the weekends was to Earth days and to take photographs of Earth. I did get a chance to glimpse North Carolina a few times. This is a picture that I took of the Outer Banks, and down in this area is actually where I'm from here. And this picture shows a little view of the sort of triangle area. RDU Airport is here, Durham and Raleigh, Chapel Hill. So it was really neat to look down and see my home from space. Of course, as I mentioned, I was inspired by the universe, and so I got to do some stargazing while I was up there too. Now, in terms of free time, no one can enjoy anything more than meals together, of course. So a little bit about how we actually eat on board the space station. All of our food is in packets, and it is typically rehydrated. So this is some rehydrated mac and cheese out of a packet. This is how I ate all my food for 11 months. And all of our beverages come in packets like this, including things like coffee. So sipping coffee out of this, stick a straw here, because obviously the food can't just be on a plate. It wouldn't stay down. If you look closely at this table, you even see how we have duct tape upside down, and we had a little bit of a shipment of apples, fresh fruit, from a cargo vehicle that had arrived. And so that's how we keep things down on the table when we need to have something that's not in a packet. The best thing to do is actually pizza night. It was a great break from all the mundane packaged food when we would get together and make some pizzas, flipping down the pizza crust and putting the toppings on, and then covering it in tinfoil and putting it in our food warmer to complete the job. I personally also loved reading on board the space station. It was really relaxing for me to do on the weekends and with my free time. Now, I think we have enough time. I'm going to show a quick clip that shows a little bit more about life on station. I think it's just fun to see things happening in microgravity. So I'll show that for you, and I'll be narrating. You may see people talking on here, but I have the video on mute, so I'll just talk us through it. So life on board the space station. Obviously, fun to do flips around. This is me inside one of our laboratory modules, so you can see that no single inch of space isn't taken up by some kind of science experiment or equipment. We have to exercise on board the space station regularly to keep our bones and muscles safe, from decaying away with the microgravity environment. And as you saw in the last clip, we can even run on a treadmill, but we have to wear a harness that's actually bungeed down to the treadmill. We can even lift weights. There's a special piece of equipment that is built in to have resistance training. It applies a force to this bar that we can sort of dial in, and so we can get our workout on. There's another view of me and some of my friends at a mealtime. As you can see, that's super fun. And even brushing your teeth in space. You put the water on the toothbrush, you kind of see the blob form there. But other than that, it's pretty normal, just like we do here on Earth. And I say that's about it in the video. This is just a little microgravity demonstration there, showing how we watch movies. We have movie night in space. And this is a cool demo of what a water blob looks like in space. And we are using two sort of paddles there that had like a hydrophobic coating on them to paddle that water through the air. and even get to do some sports, some fun, but of course, cleaning up. And this is me vacuuming our air intake in a typical weekend chores day in space. But of course, all good things have to come to an end, and eventually it was time to come home. Our capsule undocks from the space station, separates, flies through the atmosphere of Earth. It's slowed down by the atmosphere of Earth, and there's so much friction when that happens that it actually creates like a fireball around the capsule that the heat shield of the capsule is designed to take. And you see in this video, this is a video taken from the Russian Search and Rescue Forces helicopter of our capsule coming down in the parachute. And this is a little bit more of a closer up where you can see the capsule. There's how you can see how charred it is from coming home, and we're in Kazakhstan here. And eventually you are pulled out of the vehicle. Now a little bit more, and that was kind of my mission, I want to talk a little bit about what's going on with NASA in the future. So in addition to the International Space Station, which orbits around the Earth, we are going deeper into space with a mission called Artemis. And the reason I want to talk about this is I think this is so inspirational for students, because these are the things that are going to be happening when they are at the age of contributing in high school and college and post-college. The Artemis mission is going to be bringing astronauts back to the moon in a sustained way. And we're going to take those technologies and those lessons learned from that Artemis mission. We're going to learn from science on the moon as well. And the next step is onto Mars. So bringing astronauts to Mars, I think is going to be a really exciting time where we can answer some of those some of the most fundamental questions that we all have as humans. And with that, I will conclude, and I would love to hear your questions and to see what you're curious about today.
Thank you, Astronaut Cook, for giving us a glimpse of your journey to space and your experiences as an astronaut. I think it's safe to say we were all very captivated by your photos. So we have quite a few questions for you. So our first question is, what advice would you give to young girls that love STEM? In other words, what advice would you give to a younger version of yourself?
Yes, thank you. Thanks for that question. I think that is something I think about a lot. And, in some ways, I feel like I'm speaking to the experts on that subject. So the things I'll say are just kind of more informed by my own personal experiences. And I do have a slide that I'll share with some of the points. So regarding in particular young girls in STEM, and of course, this is an important thing because it's so important to bring students into STEM fields just for, to keep innovating as a country. And right now we have an untapped resource of girls in STEM. Less than 25% of STEM fields are represented by women. And so we, just to tap into that level of innovation and talent, I think there's some things that we can do that are in particular to, the challenges that young girls might face. I think one big one is to find a mentor. And if you don't have one in person, find someone online, either through videos or following someone. And this was really instrumental to me. I remember I had a job as an electrical engineer. I was working on space science missions. And one of my colleagues who was designing part of our instrument told me one day that he was going to go to meet with an expert in the field of the thing he was designing to have his design checked out. And it turned out it was a woman electrical engineer. And it was actually one of the first times that I had heard of a female engineer that was in, such a highly regarded technical role. And it really boosted me. It had a tangible effect on me, realizing that, people really respected her and actually went to her, even other professionals who had been in the field for many, many years. And just seeing that really gave me quite a boost. Another thing I think about is to shift the focus from just participating to actually excelling. Don't only think about how I can be in this field, but think about how can I lead in this field? How can I innovate and trailblaze in this field? And sometimes that will help us shift the focus to not just being there, but to actually taking the next step and being our absolute best. Another thing is it may happen that there are things that you will encounter that are difficult. Those can be things like imposter syndrome, where you don't feel like, you're the real deal. And to that, I say, remember, everyone has the same questions and uncertainties that you do. I went through college, and oftentimes I was afraid to raise my hand because I thought that maybe I was the only person that didn't understand, what we were talking about or had a question. Sometimes I was so afraid that even my question didn't make any sense. And I would find out in my study groups and homework groups that wasn't the case. Usually everyone was just as confused as me if I was confused too. Another thing I encountered is stereotype threat. And that is actually a condition where whether or not people have a stereotype against you, if you think they have that stereotype, it actually can negatively affect your performance. And one way that I would combat this was in my spacewalk training. In spacewalks is actually one of the areas that we see the biggest differences in male and female participation. There have been, I think, 15 females total in the world that have ever done a spacewalk, and there have been only over 200 men who have done a spacewalk. And so, in the trainings, of course, that stereotype is looming large. And to combat it, before my trainings, I would actually tell myself over and over again, I would look around at the people around me up in the control room, the ones that would be evaluating me, and I would think, these people think I am awesome at spacewalking. Their friends told them I am a great spacewalker. And so instead of picturing them cringing every time I would make a mistake, I would picture them just being like, yes, she's so good. And whether that was true or not, just replacing that in my mind really, really helped me. Another thing I've learned through my aviation training is something called chair flying. And chair flying is when you actually simulate a situation that's intimidating and you act out how you're gonna react to that situation. So something for me was, let's say I was the only female in a certain technical meeting, and as soon as I said something in the meeting, like all eyes would turn to me because, whoa, there's a female voice in the room. And I would chair fly how that would feel, how I would continue speaking, and just sort of expecting that feeling that I would have really helped me to work through that. Another thing is to make sure you dispel the myths. There are myths that you have to be super competitive to be in STEM, myths that it's impossible to have a family while you're in STEM field. And also to highlight the fact that STEM is a really great way to make the world better, to contribute to the world, and be a part of your community. And then a couple other things I have on here: fight for yourself like you would your best friend. Incorporate critical thinking into your everyday world. If there's something that you've never quite understood and you just aren't sure about, research it, find out about it, and then you can become an expert on even things that intimidate you at first. And then there's sort of two things that I think sort of run the gamut, not just for girls, but do what scares you. Reach out. Don't shy away from the things that intimidate you. Go after them and live the life you imagine. Sometimes being our authentic selves can be one of the hardest things to do. And if you think back to right now, what are you imagining your future to be? Remember that image and chase after it, and it can help you kind of stay on the right.
Thank you for that. Such great insight. So our next question: across North Carolina, 3 and 4 of our after school, before school, and summer programs engage youth in STEM. What advice would you give to our program providers? How can they support STEM skill development and ignite STEM passion for the youth they serve?
Another great question. And again, I feel like I'm speaking to the experts on this, and you all probably know way more about STEM engagement than me. But thinking about, what did matter to me and what kind of made a difference for me. Sharing a screen here in case you're seeing the confusion in my face. Okay, there we go. One of the things I think different people excel at different things are going to get, excited by different things. So I loved hands-on things, but I also loved the kind of paperwork of STEM fields. So a wide range of content, I think, will catch a wider net that'll sort of interest many, many students. Whether that's even role-playing things, researching people, doing visits to STEM careers, paperwork, hands-on, experiments, demos, just as much variety as possible. A lot of people think that if they're not getting A's in every STEM class, then they may not be cut out for it. I was kind of an anomaly. I never really caught on my biology classes. They always confused me. Um, but I loved math. And so, remember, you can let people know that they don't have to be perfect in everything to be eligible or to be to have a great STEM career. I read that a lot of this conference is focused on, research proven techniques. And that is so important. I was doing some research myself, just internet research, and I found some folks that were saying there's evidence that, especially for girls, but I think this is wide again for any diverse group of students, the language you use can sometimes, if you vary the language, you again can cast that wider net and kind of interest everyone, or at least not alienate people. And I've heard that some people are intimidated by the idea of being a scientist, but the idea of doing science wasn't as intimidating and didn't turn students off. So, just as I thought of some examples there, I know for me, I was always intimidated because people would say things like, "Oh, scientists study the Earth and they do research," and I thought, how am I going to know what to research? I don't even know where to begin. I don't even know what a lab looks like. Maybe I'm not cut out for this. I can't think of any research ideas. And it turns out that it's such a step-by-step process that, of course, every step along the way, I got closer to understanding how that would actually come to fruition, what that would actually look like. So, making it feel more and more realistic by the idea of short-term goals, long-term goals, seeing people in those careers, I think is so important. And then finally, I had someone say to me once something that really was profound and sort of changed, I thought, how I regarded my own career path. And it was a supervisor that I had at a job when I was teaching a physics at a community college, kind of as a second job. And he said to me, "I know you're going to do something great one day." And I thought, wow, I had no idea that I was giving anyone that impression. But he said it so fervently that it really stuck with me. And I thought, wow, I wonder what would be different in my life if he hadn't said those words to me. And so, I just think it's so important that we say those words to each other, to students. And I even tell students, if no one's saying that to you, tell yourself, tell your friends, you are going to do something great one day. And so those are kind of the things that came to mind when I thought about that question.
Awesome. So as I told you earlier, yesterday we hosted our first ever Youth Voices panel with 9 amazing youth who participate in after school, before school, and summer programs across the state. And they did an extraordinary job sharing their perspectives with us and reminding us of the why behind the work that we do. They're all watching today, right now, and they have a few questions for you. So Brinley wants to know, when you were a child, was your first dream of your life to become an astronaut?
You know what, Brinley? It actually was. I don't even remember a time when I didn't want to be an astronaut. Some people ask me, how long ago did you know? And I don't really remember wanting to be something else. But that doesn't mean that your dreams can't change over time. But, so it's kind of a balance between being true to maybe that early person you were when you were truly just acting on your own passions and what excited you, versus, being open and being open to new challenges, the new things that entice you and challenge you, and maybe even scare you, but that you don't shy away from. So for me, it was a dream I had my whole life. I was very lucky because even though I was growing up in, Jacksonville, North Carolina, kind of a small town, none of my teachers discouraged me. I would show up to kindergarten and tell my teacher I wanted to be an astronaut, and I never had anyone, tell me, "May, you might want to have a backup plan." Um, Everyone just really encouraged me. So I would say that's something that, we can do for each other as well.
Our next question is from William. He wants to know, how long does it take to travel to space?
Great question. Now, typically to go into what we call low Earth orbit, which is where the space station is and where most of the shuttles went when the shuttle was running, it's about 8 minutes. And it's kind of across the board. It was 8 minutes in the shuttle, 8 minutes in the Soyuz, and it was 8 minutes in the SpaceX vehicle that just launched for the first time with astronauts on board. So after that, it took us about 6 hours to get to the space station. Now, if you want to go farther, like going to the moon, that's going to be a couple-day trip. And if you want to go all the way to Mars, like, for example, we had a launch yesterday of another Mars rover called Perseverance, that can take around 6 months. So the Mars Perseverance rover is going to get there in about February.
Wow. Whew, 6 months. So then Madison, his older sister, her question is, what are the seatbelts like on the spacecraft?
Madison, great question, because that is so important. Not only do they have to keep you in when you're rumbling up and you're actually moving into space, but after you get to space and you're in microgravity, they have to actually keep you in your seat. The coolest feeling that I ever had in my launch was after the third stage of our rocket dropped away and there was no more propulsion. Suddenly you know you're in space because you sort of float out of your seat to the end of your seatbelt. So it's a 5-point seatbelt with a sort of something right in the middle. You have 2 shoulder straps and then straps on your side as well to make sure that you're tight in. And then the Soyuz vehicle that I flew in is actually so small that you're kind of cramped up in a ball with your knees all the way almost to your chest. And there's a separate seatbelt for your knees, if you can believe it or not, just to keep them folded up as much as they need to be for you to fit inside the capsule.
Wow. And then our last question from our youth panelist is from Kelsey. She wants to know, how did your life change after you returned from space?
Ooh, Kelsey, great question. It's still changing. I returned less than 6 months ago, so there's always something new that I'm discovering, either about myself that's different or even about Earth. When I first came back, I noticed, there's so many physical challenges to being in gravity again. When you first get back, you feel like there are like bowling balls hanging off of your body because everything feels heavy and a little weird. It's hard to balance. You have to learn to walk again. But then also just the mental challenge of reintegrating into society. I was on board the space station for 11 months, and during that time, I only saw 11 other humans. So when I first popped out of that capsule, I saw more people in 1 second than I had seen all year practically. So that took a lot of getting used to. In terms of how I personally have changed, I found I still love the same hobbies that I used to have. I'm still pretty much the same person, but I have noticed a certain, I want to say, seriousness about myself that wasn't there before. And I don't know if that'll go away. But I think it is just a product of living for so long in such a high stakes environment where, there was never a moment where you couldn't be vigilant about where you were, about how important it was for you to remember your training, keep yourself and your crewmates safe, and just kind of the gravity, if you will, of what I did, and just recognizing that it was a big responsibility, and I just feel like I have so much that I should be giving back to the world. And so, like I said, there's a certain sense of seriousness in my personality that I've noticed that's interesting. I'm sure regular silly Christina will return eventually, but there's definitely a little bit of a mission focus that's lingered.
That's so inspiring. From the chat, we have a couple of questions that have come up. One of them is, when you were up in space taking photos of Earth, did you feel small like you did when you were younger looking at the stars when on Earth, or was it the opposite?
Wow. I did feel small. And every once in a while, people would see the space station go over and it looks like a star, a really, really bright star moving quickly in the sky. And they would email me that they saw me as a star, and that they waved to me last night or something. And it was just my favorite thing in the whole world to hear from people on Earth. It didn't matter how many times I heard that. I loved hearing it every time, because it did bring me back to that little girl looking at the night sky. And I couldn't believe that I was now a star going by in the sky. So yes, it still made me feel small, and it made me feel really privileged that I was now getting to explore that world that it had inspired me. And let me tell you, what can really make you feel small is looking out in the universe beyond the Earth, looking at the backdrop that our planet Earth is in front of, and recognizing how vast it really is, and that the Earth truly unites us, and actually the Earth can be small in the sea of the universe. So there's just so many different things to ponder, and so many different things to, give us the perspective that we kind of all share as humans.
I don't know about anyone else, but I'm going to look differently up at the stars now after hearing you say that. Another question in the chat is, what is the one thing you miss the most during your year in space?
Miss about Earth. Well, it's funny. Sometimes I felt like I don't miss a whole lot on Earth. Obviously, I miss my friends and family so much. But in terms of just earthly things, I never was thinking, man, I really want a latte or anything like that. But I would miss sensory experiences. I would miss the idea of the wind on my face. I didn't feel wind for 11 months. I didn't, have the smell of anything kind of earthly or alive, like the smell of a forest. I used in North Carolina, I loved going running on the different trails around the state and especially in the Raleigh area. And just the smell of the woods, I miss that. I miss the sound of the ocean. I miss the feeling of sand. I live on the beach now, and I grew up near the beach in North Carolina. So I miss earthly things like that are just so special about our planet. But anytime I would, find myself maybe missing something little, I would just remember that I had so many unique things around me that I would never have again, that I would miss way, way, way more while I was there in space. And so I would just think about that instead of, missing the little things.
Thank you, Astronaut Cook. So do you have any closing thoughts you'd like to share with everyone?
Well, just thank you so much again for the work that you do. I've done a lot of kind of consolidating and thinking about my mission. And the one word that comes to mind that I've taken with me is humility. I think that, for me, as someone that was always like characterized as fiercely individual, I loved solving problems by myself and figuring things out. But what I found during my mission and in the years leading up to it is that teamwork and relying on each other is so much more important. And, carrying the responsibility of sharing this mission, carrying people's dreams into space and bringing back what I saw and learned. And just recognizing that there were times on my mission when I truly needed help and support, when I did make mistakes, and when I had to be open-minded to lots of different ways of doing things. And I think that if we all keep that open mind and remember that our mission, what is our mission, and that sometimes the best way to achieve that mission is to make sure that we're taking in all help and offering as much help as we can. So I like to just pass on that takeaway of humility any opportunity I can.
Special thank you, Astronaut Cook, for sharing your experiences as a NASA astronaut with all of us. I think it's safe for me to speak for everyone and say that you are truly an inspiration for us adults and youth alike. Thank you so much for blazing the trail for those that will follow in your footsteps and for truly making your fellow North Carolinians super, super proud.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fleming. As I said, it's my pleasure to be with you, and I'm looking forward to getting back to North Carolina when we can.
Yes, and when you're back, please let us know. We'd love to have you again.
I certainly will.